November 12, 1942, Western Desert, North Africa. The air ripples with heat, sand whispers under boots and tyres, and the wind files everything down to the same colour. A British supply column sits broken, its geometry undone, crates splintered, tarps flapping like loose tongues. Near it, a small American machine waits in the hush. Crew gone, tools abandoned, an orphan. Doctrine offers two doors: destroy it or leave it to the sun. But the reconnaissance officer chooses a third. Get our best mechanic. Sir, I want to know if we can use this thing. A short walk, a longer look, a small placard on the dash. Willys MB, the Americans call it a Jeep. A word you can spit out between breaths. The hood is raised. No chrome, no theatre. Wires braided in colours that teach the hand where to go. Labels where confusion would otherwise live. Clearances where knuckles need them. Components placed as if the designer had grease under his nails and a sergeant at his shoulder. The senior mechanic does not comment. He absorbs 2 decades bent over German vehicles. Precision, pride, procedures that own you. And he is seeing something else. A bay designed for exhaustion, not for a showroom, for the ground. Numbers on paper, numbers in steel. Go Devil in line 4, 134 cubic inches, 60 horsepower at 4,000 RPM. On any drawing board in Stuttgart, that is a shrug. In the desert, it might be the difference between waiting for rescue and becoming your own rescue. Philosophy is a word for classrooms. Here, it is a bolt size, a wire gauge, a lever throw, producible, maintainable, forgiving. That is the philosophy. You can feel it with your fingertips. Officers arrive. The question is simple. Can we use it? The answer is careful. It is built for conditions, not ceremony. A frown. German engineering is the finest in the world. No argument, just a finger pointed down. Transfer case. 1 lever, down. 4 wheels pull. No dance. No sequence to remember while someone is shooting at you. No hidden trick. The machine deletes error from the human. Across the lines, the small German workhorse is the Volkswagen Type 82 Kubelwagen. A smart machine in many respects. Light, frugal, air-cooled, so a stray round cannot bleed a radiator dry. But it carries a floor suited to paved roads and fair weather. Rear-wheel drive only. Sand swallows arrogance. Mud humbles theory. Mountain tracks punish light minds. The Jeep does not ask the terrain to be polite. They don't debate it in a circle. They drive it. That is the test. The ride is plain. Leaf springs chatter and give. Crude. Yes. But when something breaks in a field workshop, under a lump of canvas, crude becomes a synonym for fixable. The electrical system is basic, honest. The fuel system isn't precious about octane blessings. The layout invites speed. There's weight in the frame. Overbuilt, some would say. But the desert is a hammer. Overbuilt is insurance. 3 days pass in a kind of quiet assault. They load it past the rating because war loads everything past the rating. They take it into sand that eats rear-driven machines alive. They drop it into low range and let it crawl like a man on hands and knees over ridges and edges. Slow enough to think, sure enough to finish. The conclusions arrive without ceremony. It works. It keeps working. Word spreads, first as curiosity, then as a murmured claim. The Americans have a light vehicle that does the dull miracles the field demands. Mechanics walk over to see with their hands. Officers come to weigh what cannot be written. The sequence is predictable. Skepticism, respect, dismay. Not at the Jeep itself, at what it implies. A supply officer, who knew German factory floors before the uniforms, points at the engine block. The words are calm, as if he is reading numbers from a ledger. They designed this to be made. We designed to be perfect. In a total war, production outruns perfection. He taps the casting, not hobbyist machining where it doesn't buy survival. He gestures at the body panels, stamped by the thousands in plants that used to bend sheet for refrigerators and washing machines. The nation mobilized, it is visible in steel. The figures land like artillery. 640,000 plus Jeeps by war's end. Just over 50,000 Kubelwagen. Willow Run producing a B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes at peak. Liberty ships falling from the slipways in 5 to 6 weeks by 1943, not 8 months. Counting becomes a form of truth-telling. The captured Jeep becomes a minor celebrity. Drivers invent errands that happen to require it. Officers pick it for routes no one else wants to promise. When parts wear, the solution is not a prayer to a requisition clerk. It is a walk to another Jeep. Interchangeability stops being a lecture word and becomes a lived relief. A bolt threads, a plug connects, a bracket receives, regardless of which factory cast it. By early 1943, dozens of captured Jeeps are scattered through units. Mechanics build a quiet network, notes on where to find what, tricks of adjustment, a barter of parts and competence. A small black market rises around American standard fittings, not because they are exotic, but because they fit everything of their kind. Then the desert chapter ends in the way chapters sometimes do, abruptly. May 13th, 1943. Tunisia. The Afrika Korps surrenders. Roughly 250,000 German and Italian soldiers become prisoners. Their education does not end, it changes rooms. On the road to captivity, the lessons scale. American trucks nip miles into hours. What a horse can do in a day, a convoy erases by lunch. At ports, cranes make 100 men redundant. The machines do not tire. Liberty ships, with names and numbers and deadlines, render the Atlantic a schedule. The proportions tilt until it seems absurd to have ever believed otherwise. At Oran, then on to American shores. The story repeats in larger type. A motorpool is not a museum. It is a machine that keeps machines moving. Tools are abundant. Parts are present. Manuals speak a language anyone can learn in a week. The logic is unforgiving in its generosity. Write instructions for the tired, the new, the worried, because that is who will read them. In a 6th grade register, not because soldiers are simple, but because clutter kills. A sergeant with enough German to bridge the aisle catches a stare. Mechanic, Afrika Korps, maintenance, then come look, can't hurt now. He speaks as he walks, the philosophy does not hide. Everything is set up so a farm kid can fix it. Colours, labels, standard bolts. If it breaks, anyone can put it right. If we don't have the part, we make something or take something. If we can't do either, we grab another vehicle. There are enough. How many is enough? He shrugs. I don't know, thousands every week, maybe. In one motorpool, there are more vehicles than entire German divisions had, at their best. Trucks that do the work of 2 German trucks. Half-tracks on hand, not on paper. Tank transporters that turn what would be wear into a simple ride. And the thread through all of it. Component commonality. The same bolt fits a Jeep, fits a truck, fits a half-track. Same threads, same sockets, same wiring ends. Doctrine disguised as hardware. A former Ford worker, the man's hands still remember the rhythm of Willow Run, explains without decoration. Break the complex into simple, repeatable steps. Teach each worker one step. Make the steps meet. Now no single expert can stop the line. If one plant goes dark, another takes the drawings and keeps going. The contrast is no longer flattering to pride. German fleets are varied to a fault. Different makers, different years, different standards circling one another like dialects. The warehouse becomes a library where half the books are in languages you don't read. The mechanic becomes a translator whose vocabulary fails just when the shelling starts. News of Normandy, Operation Overlord, arrives the summer of 1944 in newspapers and on radios that were playing dance songs a few years ago. The numbers are comical until they kill you. 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, 150,000 men in the first wave. And vehicles, always vehicles. Those beaches are a logistics problem, posed and solved by factories. In November 1944, a spike, Ardennes, snow, fog, opportunity rehearsed as a surprise. Operation Grief sends German commandos in American uniforms, in American jeeps, to bend the battlefield by confusion. It's a compliment paid by necessity. The operation does not carry far. The larger push starves on simple chemistry. Fuel. When the fuel does not arrive, tanks become static monuments, and infantry returns to horses where engines cannot be fed. It is not a tactic, it is an obituary. Spring 1945 breaks the war's spine in Europe. The motorpools do not notice, they keep processing. The German mechanics who turn wrenches beside Americans do not celebrate. They keep count, they add, they subtract. They understand something that poster slogans can't teach. Tactics without logistics are exhibitions. Competent, brave, briefly brilliant, and then over. Repatriation begins late in 1945. One mechanic steps onto Bremen soil in January 1946. The city is smashed into a mosaic of loss. Yet among ruins, jeeps move, trucks deliver, motorpools operate like emergency hearts in a body trying to live. He walks to one, an American captain reads his papers. The English comes haltingly but usefully. Words learned in motorpools and mess halls. Camp Hearn, Texas, motorpool? Yes, sir. 2 years. We need mechanics. Most are dead or still in camps. You start tomorrow. Pay an occupation scrip. Work begins. That is the kindness war sometimes gives after the screaming stops. Work. The American approach to repair is a series of verbs. Identify, replace, improvise, verify, move on. If a part is available, put it in. If it isn't, make something work for now. If the vehicle cannot be returned to service quickly, without risk, don't worship it. Park it and use another. The goal is availability, not romance with originality. The metrics suit the moment. Vehicles in, vehicles out. Turnaround hours, readiness percentages, stock levels. The parts room is not a dragon's hoard. It is a breathing margin. The German mechanic does not forget what factory specifications mean. He sees where they matter. Procurement, baseline fits, quality at birth, and where they mislead. Field survival, under an hourglass that hates you. Perfection is a virtue. Throughput is strategy. The friendship with a former Willow Run worker puts numbers back on the table. At peak, 1 bomber an hour, 24 a day, more than 700 in a month. The arithmetic is not a detail. It is a premise under every convoy, under every crate, under every bolt whose head size repeats, because that is what logistics can love. By 1947, the mechanic supervises the German civilian staff. In a motorpool, he trains, he audits. He does the small, relentless tasks that make the big things look effortless. One evening, an American captain, equal parts manager and pragmatist, asks a question dressed as a favour. If you were to design a vehicle for this Germany, what would it be? Smaller than a Jeep, more frugal with fuel. Respect our roads and our shortages, but keep the American lessons, common parts, simple service, built to be built, not to win awards on paper. He is not inventing a future, he is translating a victory. It turns out to be a good translation. West German industry will learn to marry precision to scale, discipline to flow, quality to quantity. Volkswagen will teach the planet that simplicity can be a virtue when you can manufacture it by the million. Mercedes-Benz will take the assembly line into temples of fit and finish without losing soul. BMW will unify components so mechanics and warehouses breathe easier. The Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle, will look miraculous from far away. Up close, it will be checklists, gauges, conveyors, training sheets, and a stubborn refusal to make the same old mistakes. The veterans begin to meet again in the 1960s, fewer each time. They talk about vehicles because vehicles carry memory without asking for pain first. The Kubelwagen earns praise for being what it is: light, astute, clever, with cooling in deserts that hate water. But the conversation comes back to the other checklist, the one that war grades on: 4x4 when needed, maintenance by the minimally trained, parts that fit across fleets, frames that forgive abuse. The Jeep passes by, showing up and leaving again under its own power. Someone admits the moment when mathematics defeated faith, when they realized America was producing more Jeeps in a week than Germany was producing Kubelwagen in a year. Not a battle, not a map line changing colour, a rate. Historians will gather confessions from generals after surrender, Many of them will say it plainly. They admired the Jeep above machines, designed to frighten enemies or impress allies. The Jeep was the face of logistics, which is the skeleton of war. General George C. Marshall will call it America's greatest contribution to modern warfare. It reads like pride until you follow the threads to everything that arrived where it had to, when it had to. Because the little machine carried people to do the rest. Evidence stacks on paper as well as ground. By November 1943, the U.S. Army publishes TME 9-803, a technical manual for the Kubelwagen, how to run and mend captured German vehicles. Publication date, June 6, 1944. D-Day. The Americans plan to use whatever they can. The Germans never publish the reverse for the Jeep. They do not need to. The Jeep is self-explanatory once the hood is up. That is not romantic, it is a design triumph. A darker dataset runs under all of it. By 1943, roughly 80% of German divisions rely on horse-drawn transport. The war begins with 514,000 horses and will pull in 2.75 million horses and mules by the end. At any moment, 1.1 million work, more than 2 million die, motorized columns write in hours, horse columns write in days. Tempo is strategy. Strategy becomes fate. Years pass, the Jeep continues in American service for 35 years, and longer in places where war's tools become pieces habits. Machines outlive the people who name them. In the late 1960s, an old man puts his hand on the hood of a restored Willys MB in a quiet museum. He does not speak to the crowd. He speaks to the metal. I drove one in 42, 3 months. Wounded at El Alamein after that. The best vehicle I ever drove. Another says he examined one in Tunisia before surrender and understood, for the first time, that they had been asking the wrong design questions. A third says numbers out loud like a prayer with teeth. Over 600,000, about 50,000. The ratio speaks a language everyone can understand. The Jeep becomes a symbol because symbols can carry weight without breaking. It stands for a decision tree that put manufacture ahead of minutiae, serviceability ahead of signatures, availability ahead of applause. It stands for adequate multiplied, which is a different kind of excellence. The German mechanics had the advantage of touching both worlds, leaf springs and torsion bars, low range and reduction hubs, cast blocks and jewellery machining. They saw what lived and what died in sand, mud, cold, incompetence, fatigue, and the calendar. They took that seeing home and turned it into factories that ran differently, classrooms that taught differently, warehouses that stocked differently, fleets that worked. The rules that distilled themselves were not poetic, but they were durable. Designed for manufacture, designed for maintenance. Prefer commonality to novelty. Spend weight on durability when abuse is guaranteed. Write instructions for the tired and the new. Measure availability, not just capability. Let volume carry what elegance cannot. None of this despises precision. It rescues it by giving it a body to live in. And the small machine that taught the lesson? It keeps teaching by example, not by speech to come. By starting in the morning and coming back at night under its own power. By hauling people with maps and radios over terrain that doesn't care for either. By making competence contagious. It began when someone chose a third door, not destruction, not abandonment. Just open the hood, look, learn. One lever, 4 wheels pulling, done. More weight, more survival, standard bolts, standard peace of mind, adequate, multiplied, wins. War took that side. Peace took the synthesis. The road to captivity is a corridor of instruction. Trucks of one colour, trailers of another. Everything painted in a grammar that tells a loader where to stand, a driver where to queue, a clerk which column to mark. What horses did with patience, these engines do with tempo. The convoy passes what used to be problems and turns them into hours. The lesson is a hum under everything. Speed is not only velocity, it is organisation. At the docks, cranes make a choreography of weight. Hooks descend and rise. Pallets swing with the assurance of practiced wrists. Cargo moves as if it wants to move. Men move with it. The mind that arranged this has no interest in drama. The metric is throughput. And then across the water, Liberty ships that took 8 months to build become ships that take 5 to 6 weeks by 1943. Naming them seems almost whimsical given the tempo, but the names matter. They say this is repeatable. Repeatable becomes a weapon. On the American side, Norfolk, Virginia, breathes in and out daily with tonnage that would have been campaign-defining a generation earlier. Railway lines peel away from the port like nerves from a ganglion. Freight cars couple, uncouple, depart. Prisoners see what industrial scale looks like when it has a purpose. The trains run through a country that does not seem to be at war, at least not in the way Europe understands the term. Parking lots full of cars, highways where civilian trucks and military convoys share asphalt, depots that look like tidy cities of boxes and fuel drums. The contradiction is no contradiction. Civilian life continues, industry hums, and still the war machine is fed. In a prisoner of war camp, Camp Hearn, Texas, the selection for skills carries no bitterness. Mechanics are asked to be mechanics. The motorpool does not care for uniforms. It cares for uptime. The first walk through the shop is a catalogue of what had been missing elsewhere. Tools in quantity, parts in stock, manuals that teach, procedures that assume exhaustion. A young American soldier, barely older than a boy, takes apart a fuel pump on a workbench with a confidence born from repetition and clear steps. Each fastener goes into the same tray every time, in the same order, so nothing gets lost even when the air is filled with noise. The manual is open beside him. Diagrams are large. Arrows are generous. Words are short. A 6th grade reading level is a kindness in a place where attention is scarce. The German mechanic notices what he ought to have noticed long ago. Design is not only shape and material, it is also documentation and training. If you teach poorly, you have designed poorly. If you write cleverly and confuse your reader, you have failed your machine. He puts a hand on a page and understands that ink and paper are parts too. The sergeant who noticed him earlier lays out the philosophy in a single sentence. We make it so anyone can fix it, the rest are footnotes. Colour codes on wires, label plates where a guess would cost time, standard bolt sizes so a single set of sockets can live on every truck, Jeep and half-track, common electrical connectors that do not require a special crimp from a special tool in a special drawer guarded by a special man. The parts room is peace of mind in shelves, rows of filters, belts, wires, plugs, gaskets, bearings. When a number on a spreadsheet drops below a threshold, someone orders more. The threshold is not mystic, it's a safety margin, learned by counting how often things fail. Logistics here is a feedback loop, not folklore. There is no heroism in this, that is the point. A former Ford worker, now in uniform, describes Willow Run as if he is remembering a rhythm, not a place. You do one thing, the guy next to you does one thing. Everyone learns fast because the thing is teachable. There is pride in the boredom, pride in standard work, pride in creating a system where no one person's absence breaks the line. Drawings are not art here, they are permissions. If a plant far away needs to build the same thing, it uses the same drawing, the same gauge, the same inspection standard. Interchangeability is not about convenience, it is about resilience. The German mechanic thinks of home, too many models, too many variants, too many exceptions that required a senior man's memory to navigate. It made the senior man indispensable. It made the system fragile. He makes friends, a soldier from the Midwest whose first engine was a tractor, a boy from the coast who had never held a ratchet before basic training and now sets valve lash by feel, a clerk who can find any part number by category, shelf and bin while joking about baseball. None of them are extraordinary. Together, they are a competence. The work itself is mundane: oil changes, brake adjustments, ignition timing, wheel bearings, U-joints, transfer case inspections. The Jeep receives its services like a patient who knows the hospital. The schedule is regular, the parts are available, the job is now. When the mechanic asks the sergeant about production again, The answer is the same shrug. Thousands, every week. The shrug is the lesson. This volume is ordinary here. By the time summer 1944 comes, and Operation Overlord places its numbers on history, 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, 1,000 men in the first wave. The German mechanic does not have to imagine what feeds such a day. He has turned the wrenches that make possibilities real. He has read the manuals that let barely trained hands succeed. He has looked at a parts shelf that says, without boasting, we won't run out. The autumn of 1944 tries to break the rhythm. Ardennes, snow-gripped trees, the cold bite of opportunity and desperation. Operation Grief borrows American clothes and American Jeeps to pass as something they are not. The Jeep's ubiquity and trustworthiness are part of the plan. It is a strange compliment. It is also a necessity born of shortage. The plan frays under interrogation and vigilance. The broader push starves where it needed to be fed. Tanks wait like buildings. Infantry plods behind horses that steam in the cold. It is a reminder that chemistry, fuel, answers questions that tactics cannot. In the spring of 1945, Europe's war ends like a machine whose gears can no longer find each other. The motorpool in Texas does not cheer. It catches up on backlog. The German mechanic is repatriated late 1945. He sets foot in Bremen in January 1946. Streets are lines drawn in debris. Windows stare without glass. Bridges remember their spans as a story told by their stubs. And yet, jeeps move in this silence. Trucks creak under crates that smell of flour and medicine. A motorpool breathes like a lung without a body. He walks to it. He presents papers to an American captain who looks younger than responsibility would suggest. The English he learned in Texas is functional, if ungainly. I was Oberfeld-Weibel, mechanic, worked 2 years in your motorpool. The captain reads. He nods once. We need mechanics. He has said it too many times this month to make it heavy. You start tomorrow. Pay is in occupation script. The relief is not dramatic. It is work. Training begins in reverse. The German mechanic trains Germans the American way. He does not say it that way. He demonstrates it. Tools have homes. When a tool does not return to its hook, someone notices. Parts have homes. When a part number is off by 1 digit, someone corrects it before it becomes 2 days of trouble. The maintenance interval is not a suggestion. It is the basis of forecasting. A vehicle that misses a service today will demand a bigger service tomorrow at a worse time. The ledger is moral in that way. Young men arrive who are boys while the cities fell. They know how to carry things. They do not know how to true a drum, or set a point gap, or pack a wheel, bearing without smearing dirt into grease. They learn. The manuals help. The diagrams help. The color codes help. The Jeep helps by having been designed to be learned by such men. The captain keeps numbers. He measures turnaround times in hours, vehicle availability as a percentage, mean time between failure as a moving average on a chalkboard. He adjusts stock levels based on these numbers because guesswork is expensive. The German mechanic appreciates the coldness of it. He has learned that coldness can be another name for care when every decision is a trade-off. The conversation about design for a new Germany arrives one evening with cigarettes and a tired kind of curiosity. If you were to draw the first lines, the captain says, what would you draw? Something smaller than a Jeep, the mechanic answers. More fuel efficient. Our roads are narrow, our fuel is scarce, but it must keep the same philosophy. Common parts across types, maintenance that does not require a priesthood, manufacturability first, perfection only where it buys reliability and speed of assembly. The captain nods. He mentions plans and funds, how money will arrive with conditions and hopes attached, how factories will be rebuilt and repurposed the way American factories were repurposed in 1942. The mechanic finds that the word repurpose is doing a lot of work in his head. The world is trying to repurpose itself. In these months, the German mechanic writes processes the way procedures were written in Texas. He translates not just language, but method. He insists on checklists, even when a colleague says, I know this by heart. Hearts get tired, checklists do not. He introduces the habit of line-side stock, Keep the parts you will certainly need within arm's reach of the job. Inventory belongs where the hand needs it, not where some old rule said it should live. Mechanics stop walking in circles. They stop shouting for a runner. The room quiets by a degree. He helps reorganize the parts catalogue by function and cross-reference, so that a filter is not just a filter for one model, but an entry that tells you also fits other models. A single SKU can save 3. The warehouse shrinks without losing power. He learns to love metrics, the way a soldier learns to love a canteen, not as an identity, as a way to survive the day. He watches numbers move and hears the story underneath. Availability rises, backlog falls, turns. The number of times the inventory breathes in and out. Climb until the parts room becomes a place of flow, not storage. When the Volkswagen plant revs again, he visits, not as a spy, not as a critic, as a man who wants to see what marrying precision to volume looks like on German soil. He sees stampings that can be made by the thousands. He sees fasteners that repeat. He sees sub-assemblies that are ready to install without adjustment, because the preceding stations constrained variation. He sees simplicity treated as a design achievement, not a concession. He smiles without thinking about it. In a quiet office, a younger engineer explains a decision that would have been heresy before the war. We standardized this bolt pattern across multiple models. It cost us a little weight here and there, but it saved us time and attention at every station and in every tool room. The German mechanic nods. He has seen this movie. He knows how it ends. The Beetle becomes a kind of parable, not because it is glamorous, but because it sells the idea that simplicity can be civilization. The car is not a jewel. It is a friend, a thing you can afford to keep. The export numbers say the idea travels well. Elsewhere, Mercedes-Benz finds a way to discipline the assembly line without extinguishing craft. Tolerances are tight, but not religious. BMW rationalizes its parts so that a mechanic does not have to be a librarian. These are not miracles. They are decisions made again and again by people who have learned that the cost of exceptions is always larger than it pretends. The 1960s bring reunions that feel like footnotes written by living men. They meet in rented halls, drink coffee or beer, and talk about machines because machines are safe ground. The Kubelwagen receives the respect it deserves. Light, frugal, air-cooled. It was a fine solution to a subset of problems. But the war, they say, was not a subset. It was all problems, every day, in bad weather, with tired hands and bad tools and worse fuel, and no time measured that way. The Jeep wins. One man describes a day when a Kübelwagen bogged in sand so soft it behaved like a liquid. The rear wheels dug themselves into a promise of progress that never came. The Jeep arrived, one lever, four-wheel drive engaged. It crawled past like a mule with better manners. The story is not told to humiliate a machine. It is told to illustrate a philosophy. Another man quotes numbers in a voice stripped of theatre. 640,000 versus just over 50,000. He doesn't say Jeeps and Kubelwagen. He doesn't need to. The ratio speaks. The room grows quieter because ratios end arguments. The historian's interviews with German generals after the war are remembered by men who never expected to care about what historians think. They care now. Because the generals said it plainly. The Jeep impressed them more than a lot of things meant to impress. A bomber kills cities, a tank breaks lines, but a Jeep arrives with people who know how to fix, how to bridge, how to call, how to lead. And it arrives again tomorrow. General George C. Marshall, calling the Jeep America's greatest contribution to modern warfare, suddenly seems less like boosterism and more like a diagnosis. Documents tell their own stories. TME 9-803, the US Army's technical manual for operating and maintaining captured Kübelwagen, is published by November 1943 with a printing date that will shine in the memory, June 6, 1944. The Americans prepared their soldiers to use what they seized. The Germans never produced an equivalent manual for the Jeep. They did not need to, The Jeep teaches with its layout, with the labels on its wires, with a transfer case lever that bypasses riddles. The uglier arithmetic of transport in the German army rounds the lesson. By 1943, around 80% of divisions still moved by horse. The army entered the war with 514,000 horses and would press 2.75 million horses and mules into service over the years. With 1.1 million at work at any given time, more than 2 million animals would die in that service. Their speed is the speed of walking. Supply chains that move at a walk cannot support operations that require surprise at a distance. Surprise is a time function as much as it is a map function. The German mechanic files these things not as opinions but as premises. He writes them into his own practice. When he trains new men, he does not accept "I know this by heart" as a substitute for a checklist. When he organises a bay, he refuses to put a crucial tool in a drawer that takes a key that belongs to a man who is sometimes sick. When he orders parts, he orders the same ones again and again on purpose, until the duplication in the fleet is no longer accidental, but policy. He tells a young man something he once would have rejected. Adequate, done for everyone, beats excellent, done for few. The young man frowns in the way young men frown when ideals are questioned. The mechanic points at the vehicles outside. The frown fades. He is not attacking excellence. He is placing it where it will buy the most. Years accumulate. The Jeep continues in service with American forces for 35 years. It is replaced in American units by something that wears a harder face. But that is another era's story. Elsewhere, the Jeep serves still, sometimes under different names, sometimes wearing surplus paint under a new sun. In museums, the Jeep loses its dust and gains a sign. People lean in to read an abstract of a life lived in mud. Old men lean in to touch metal that remembers their hands. The stories never quite match, but they rhyme. One lever, 4 wheels pulling, done. Leaf springs that clattered but did not apologise. Frames that took blows without asking for permission. Bolt heads that never surprised a mechanic. The day the hood was first lifted in the desert returns as a scene the German mechanic can replay in his head, with fewer details than he would like, and more certainty than he expected. He can smell hot metal under sunlight. He can see coloured wires like a map. He can hear the click of a lever seating. Feel the crawl in low range. Watch the sand choose not to swallow this machine. He can hear an officer's scepticism transform into a question. And the answer arrived not as an argument, but as a demonstration. The memory keeps its shape because it was not a single astonishment. It was a sequence. Hood up, labels, wires, spanners that fit, a frame that forgave, a design that presumes fallible humans doing the right thing most of the time under conditions that try to make them do the wrong thing. That presumption is generosity of a different kind. It is the generosity of systems. He thinks of the manuals again, of the TME 9803 that taught Americans how to drive and service a captured Kubelwagen, published and waiting by D-Day, and of the absence of a mirror document in German hands for the Jeep because the Jeep is readable without translation. This thought produces a mixture of embarrassment and admiration he will never quite resolve. He thinks of Willow Run, still, as if it were a drumbeat, 1 bomber an hour, 24 a day, more than 700 a month. He has no reason to revisit the number often anymore. He does anyway. The number is a parable that can be told without adjectives. It teaches the same thing every time. He thinks of the port cranes, the railheads, the warehouses where a particular bolt was not a treasure, but a line item with a promised replenishment date. He thinks of how many promises kept it takes to make a bridge appear at the right bend of a river on the right morning so a column does not stop. He thinks of horses, he thinks of their eyes, of harnesses and wagons and mud and cold and the way animals breathe heavily in it. He does not vilify horses. He recognises they were a plan when there was no plan. He recognises that a nation which thought of itself as modern still moved like a century prior on most days. He recognises what tempo means in any language. In the motorpool, he writes a short list on a board where men will pass and roll their eyes and then do it anyway. Don't confuse ritual with procedure. Ritual is for comfort. Procedure is for outcomes. Teach with drawings big enough to understand at a glance. If you have to explain the drawing failed. Put the tool where the hand reaches next, not where the rulebook says it belongs. One standard beats 5 clever variants every time. Design the job for the tired. If the tired can succeed, the rested will excel. Measure what you intend to improve, then improve what you can measure. Accept good enough in the right places so must be perfect can live in the few places it pays. Men smirk at aphorisms. They stop smirking when the queue shrinks. A new foreman suggests a change. 2 shelves swapped to bring filters next to oil. A small change. The board approves with a pencil mark. The next month's numbers tilt by minutes per service. Minutes reclaimed, become hours reclaimed, become one more vehicle available every day. This is how miracles look from close range, like minutes. In the evenings, when the city hum is a new sound, and not a memory of what used to be, the mechanic walks streets that are returning to their straightness. He hears a car idling cleanly, and knows without turning that its mixture is right, that its timing is close, that its fan belt is not frayed. He can tell when a shop he passes is a shop that keeps its bolts sorted by thread and washers stacked by size. He can tell when a shop still believes that memory is more reliable than labels. He hopes those shops will learn before they fail. Sometimes he dreams of the desert, not the heat, not the smoke, the silence after the engine shuts down, and the tick-tick of metal cooling under a sky that does not care. The first time he ran his fingertips along a labelled loom, and thought, almost angrily. Of course, the moment he felt the weight of the frame with a palm, and understood that someone had chosen survival over theoretical elegance. He tells the story to apprentices who ask why the American machine mattered. He tells it like a parable, because parables are easier to repeat. We thought perfection would save us, he says. They built for manufacturing and maintenance. The desert kept score. They laugh at the desert keeps score. They stop laughing when the motorpools availability hits a new high, and the captain buys a round of coffee for everyone, and tapes the chart to the wall with the flat satisfaction of a man who has decided to be happy today. He keeps a small notebook inside, in a tight hand. He has written numbers that used to frighten him. 640,000 plus, just over 50,000, 63 minutes, 5 to 6 weeks, 80%, 514,000, 2.75 million, 1.1 million, 2 million, 30 kilometers per day. The numbers no longer frighten him. They warn him, they guide him. They remind him that every system is a set of rates. If you don't control your rates, the world will control them for you. Sometimes he runs a finger down the page like a rosary. It is not piety, it is practice. When he is asked, late, in a different decade, what he admired most about the Jeep, he says something that would sound like an insult if you did not understand. It is plain. He lets the word hang. Then he defines his terms. Plain means legible. Plain means available. Plain means honest about what it can do and silent about what it cannot. Plain means nothing is hidden behind a flourish or a fragility. Plain means it does not betray you. In a photograph from a veterans gathering in the 1960s, several men stand around a restored Jeep. One touches the hood. One leans on the fender in a way that would have earned a shout once and earns a smile now. The caption, written by someone who was not there, says something about nostalgia. The men would quarrel with the word. It isn't nostalgia, it's recognition. They are recognizing an answer they had the privilege to learn the hard way. If the story were only about a particular vehicle, it would be precious. It is not. It is about a direction. It is about centering use and users. Ensuring repair is a design requirement. Treating manufacture as part of the engineering problem, not a postscript. It is about asking what fails first and testing that until it stops surprising you. It is about building enough and building again. Those principles rebuilt a country. They moved Volkswagen toward worldwide ubiquity. They taught Mercedes-Benz how to place excellence at stations where it buys reliability. They taught BMW to speak a language warehouses can understand. They made the phrase economic miracle less mystical and more mechanical. The German mechanic does not think in such grand terms. He thinks in jobs completed, in schedules met, in charts that bend the right way. He thinks of a lever. He thinks of 4 wheels pulling. He thinks of the sound of a transfer case sliding into place as the exact sound of a decision. He thinks of his first officer, who frowned and said, "German engineering is the finest in the world." He does not disagree, even now. He just knows what the sentence missed. Finest must travel with fastest to build, with easiest to fix, with hardest to break. He believes in those conjunctions, now the way he once believed in slogans. On some mornings, he arrives early, stands at the threshold of the bay, and listens to men take sockets out of drawers, to air wrenches coughing awake, to the gentle whine of a belt dressing, to the long breath of a brake bleed. It is an orchestra without violins. It is a good sound. He walks to a Jeep. He runs his hand along the hood where the paint is thinner from use. He opens it. He looks at the colour-coded harness, as if greeting an old friend. He confirms nothing has changed. He lowers the hood. The latch snaps. The sound is small and complete. In a corner of the office, a manual sits among others. It is not for the Jeep. It is the Kubelwagen manual, TME 9803, dog-eared because curiosity and utility can share the same object. He keeps it there as a reminder that even an enemy's machine can become a teacher when you write down what you learn and give it to the next person without pride. At lunch, someone tells a joke about how Americans write everything down and Germans write nothing down because everyone already knows. It's a poor joke. It earns a laugh because it is unsafe and also true enough to sting. The mechanic says nothing. He just points at the whiteboard where the availability number is higher this month than last. After the shift, he walks home on streets that used to be rubble. He passes a storefront where a radio plays a song that sounds like forgetting. He passes children. He passes a car with a rear wheel on a jack and a man without a clue. He stops. He kneels. He shows the man where to place the jack under frame, not under thin sheet. He shows him how to loosen the lugs before the lift and torque them after, evenly. He does not explain why this kindness matters. He does the job and leaves. Design for the tired, teach the tired, the rest follows. When veterans meet in another town and another year, someone brings a scrapbook. There is a blurred photograph from the desert. 2 men at a hood, one pointing at wires, the other looking where the finger points. The caption says, "Captured Jeep." The man holding the book does not correct the caption. He corrects the memory. He says, "No, lesson begins." He writes a letter to a friend he last saw by a ferry. He describes a day at the motorpool. He describes a young man who learned to set timing by ear so well you'd think he was cheating. He describes a truck that came in with 3 problems and left with none. Turned around in a fraction of the time it would have taken once. At the end, he writes a small sentence that has no flourish. "We are faster now because we are simpler now." The friend writes back a month later. He says his factory is borrowing a page from the motorpool, standardizing sub-assemblies across products where no one had thought to before. He says it is unromantic. He says it is effective. He says he is learning to prefer effective. The German mechanic holds the letter and thinks about a frame that was overbuilt on purpose, about mass devoted to durability, about the way engineers often talk about weight as if it were a sin when the world is asking for resilience. He smiles. He returns to work. The Jeep remains in use in his city long after it stops being the newest thing. Newer vehicles arrive with curves and comforts and advances he respects. But the Jeep keeps its job because reliability is a currency everyone accepts. It may not be pretty, it is present. He hears that in 1976 the American Army begins to replace it with something larger, the kind of machine that looks like it never smiles. The HMMV. He shrugs. Time moves, requirements shift. He does not feel betrayal. He feels completion. A tool served its time and kept arriving. Now another tool will take the job. The logic holds. That same year, he reads that Volkswagen celebrates the 1 millionth Golf. He sees in that number the synthesis that rebuilt his country. Precision married to volume, patience married to throughput. He likes the word million in that context. It suggests access. It suggests a fleet, not an elite. In a final reunion he attends near the end of the century. The men are fewer and the stories are shorter. Each man wears his life on his face. They gather near a Willys MB that belongs to a museum, but acts like it belongs to whoever puts a hand on it. They appraise it without speaking. Each sees a different scene in the same lines. One says, "We never had vehicles like this." He pauses. He does not mean shape or paint or cleverness. He means numbers. He means reliability. He means philosophy. "We built for perfection," he says. "They built for production." He does not spit the words. He puts them down gently, like a tool that still has life left. The German mechanic, older than his father ever got to be, nods. He adds the quiet amendment he has earned the right to add. And then we learn to combine them. Hood up, colour-coded wires, one lever, 4 wheels pulling, a frame that believes in punishment and keeps going, a manual that speaks to the tired, a parts room that speaks to the future, factories that speak to each other. It began in sand. It continued in shipping lanes and rail yards and motorpools, and assembly lines and classrooms. It continues in shops where a young person learns. For the first time, that design is kindness when it is done with the future user in mind. He cleans his hands. He writes a final line on the board before he goes. Build what can be built again. Teach what can be taught again. Fix what can be fixed again. He caps the marker. He leaves the bay, outside. A Jeep idles with the sound of something that has never apologized for being plain.